Welcome to the Manufacturing Austin podcast. This is a reboot of a podcast that we used to have, and we've been waiting to bring it back. So here we are, and I'm excited to be here. This is actually our second shot at doing this. Our speaker today, we tried to do this earlier in February, and as things work in Texas, if you get temperatures below freezing and a little precipitation, we have to shut the state down. So we had to cancel and reschedule. So Rami, I'm
glad Murphy instead of me.
That's right. That's right. So I'm glad you were able to make it back.
My pleasure.
We'll talk about introduce Rami here in a minute, but making the trip over from Israel. So thank you again for coming back and being over here. So we are excited to be here today to kick this off. Manufacturing Austin is really a concept about talking things that are happening in manufacturing these days, as well as highlighting our ARMA members and the interesting stuff that's happening in Central Texas. And so you'll see that as we move forward and feature some of our members. Today, we're going to feature a concept in manufacturing called the theory of constraint, and we're excited to talk about that a little bit more. Before we jump into that, I do want to thank our sponsor, Texas Mutual. They have been a longtime supporter of manufacturing and of ARMA. So thank you, Texas Mutual, for once again coming back and supporting our podcast as we move forward. So we're excited to have you back and be a part of this. I'd also give a shout out to our MFG tribe folks that are behind the camera today and producing the podcast for us for going forward. Again, another longtime supporter of ARMA over the years. So thank you. So let's kind of kick it off.
Let's go.
Let's see what we're going to do. So we're really going to talk today about theory of constraint, which when I met you last year, I had told you I was a recovering CPA, but I was familiar with the book, The Goal, that your father wrote. This is kind of the Bible of the theory of constraint. It's 40th anniversary, I think we're talking about, right?
1984.
There you go. So I read this book probably about 35 years ago, but I think I caught you off guard when I said I read it in my cost accounting class.
Yeah, that's quite unique.
Yeah. So, and what I like to say, why would a cost accountant be reading The Goal, which is talking about constraints and lean and efficiencies? Well, there's a lot of discussion in the book with the cost accountant in the company who does an analysis and provides data and feedback. So it became a staple in the cost accounting arena as well. So happy today to be talking about a book that is still relevant after all of these years, and for me, coming back full circle to the book. So let's introduce Rami Goldratt, who is with Goldratt Consulting today, and I will let you introduce yourself.
Sure. So Rami Goldratt, I'm the son of Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt, the person who created the theory of constraints. And by the way, most of the time when we talk, I will not call him by his name, because in the Jewish tradition, we typically call our parents father or mother. We don't call them rabbi names. And so I was heading my father's consulting business for the last 20 years or so, several hundred consultants worldwide, working big operation in the US, Japan, India, Brazil, Latin America, everywhere. Personally, my family is from Israel. I'm spending my time usually in the air between the regions. So that's me.
It's a lot of traveling. So again, thank you
for
coming back. And maybe later we can talk about some of the consulting that you're doing down the road with our friends at the San Antonio Manufacturing Association.
Sure.
And hopefully a program that we will also replicate up here with our members. So I kind of want to you had given me an example when we first met, and it was the Delta Airlines coming out of COVID, and it was really a great way to kind of introduce a constraint in the system, and I thought that was really cool, and I'd love for you to just kind of talk about that again to kind of kick off this big theory.
I usually, when I speak with people about the theory of constraints and the book The Goal, because the book is talking about a plant manager and how he recovered his plant and turned it around. And most people that have heard about theory of constraints, the first industry they think about is manufacturing. However, the book is relevant and is being recommended by top executives across many different types of industries. And one of them is Gil West, who was the CEO of Delta Airlines. He's now the CEO of Hertz. And So basically, Delta Airlines' journey started in the first decade of the 2000, after they got out of almost the bankruptcy that they had, and at the time they were very much cost sensitive. So to the extent that they were counting the number of peanuts in the bags that they were giving the passengers, and of course, when we are just trying to be more efficient and more cost effective, you're starting to hurt the value that you provide to their customers, and you start tanking down. So after they recovered from the bankruptcy, they said, okay, let's turn the company around. Let's understand what are the major constraints we have in our operation. And we've been working with them for the last decade across all their functions, all the sectors, from engine maintenance to line maintenance to catering operation. To gate operation during regular time, during IROP, which is irregular operation, all those kind of things. In COVID, they faced a huge challenge, obviously, like every airline, because basically the industry was shut down. And like most airlines, they offered incentives to their pilots and other staff to retire. And these are the senior pilots.
Yeah.
So now,
which when they retire them, they can't bring them back, right?
Exactly.
So
now, when we're done with COVID and the demand spiked very quickly for airlines, they had struggled to recruit them back, because there's a union issue, right? After you give someone benefits to retire early, you cannot just recruit him. And this pilots became their huge constraints, which is very strange for the airline industry. They used to operate thinking of the airplanes as the constraint, not the pilots.
Yeah.
So, of course, we had to, I'm not going to go into all the details, but we had to really change the way they schedule, the way they run the lines, which airplanes they function in every line, in order to get the most from this constraint, which was the pilots at that time.
And really, the constraint was, right, to fly certain aircraft, they needed to have experience on that aircraft, right? And these are some of the larger aircraft, which... how do you get that experience? And I think the way you explained it, and the idea was, you need to take some of these larger aircrafts and put them in shorter routes, which gives them the flight time,
correct.
Right?
And this enables you to speed up the accumulation of hours that the less senior pilots accumulate in order to get certificate to fly the larger airplanes.
Right.
But of course, when you do just cost accounting, to fly a big aircraft on a short distance route doesn't seem logical, right? You will not fill up the aircraft. Yeah. It all depends what is the constraint that you need to exploit.
All right. So that's a great story. And I want to talk about another example in a minute. But here's a question I have for you about the book, The Goal, because it's written in a narrative style. It's a love story, right? And a lot of people don't expect that. And so I've always wondered, when that book came in, how does a bookstore decide where that book needs to go? Does it need to be in romance, or does it need to be in business management?
This is a comment my father often heard when he was trying to convince publications to publish this book. They said, Dr. Goldratt, we don't even know which shelf to put it on, right? but it is, it's now considered one of the top 5 bestsellers of management books in history. So.
Yeah. Well,
which shelf you'll find it most of the time, I would assume management, but it's a good story.
I think so, yeah. But it is an easy story, and I love the way that it is, just a narrative about not only Alex's journey in trying to fix a factory, but dealing with his marriage as well, which is falling apart.
One of the things my father loved to share with the audience, he said that he got many letters from readers of the book along the years, and one letter he particularly remembers. And that is a letter from a plant manager that said, Dr. Goldratt, I want you to know that I read your book and I've applied exactly one-to-one what you describe in the book and got all the results and recovered the plant, except for one. My wife has not returned yet home. So,
wow.
So,
almost. All right. Well, every book should have a happy ending, right? So we have a happy ending. So let's kind of pivot and talk about another example that you have and Jeff Bezos' approach at Amazon and the required reading.
So, as I mentioned, a lot of executives not from manufacturing are recommending this book. One of them is Jeff Bezos. So there is a famous book about Amazon. It's called Amazon, the Everything Store, the story of Jeff Bezos. And in this book, at the end, there is an appendix. And the appendix is titled Jeff Bezos' Recommended Reading List. And it says, like, here are a dozen books that shape the way Amazon is working. And one of them is the book, The Goal. And it's described there that the goal was basically, I'm just quoting it. It says, the goal was the Bible for Jeff Wilke, who was the COO of Amazon at the time, and the team that fixed Amazon Fulfillment Network. So around the year 2000, 2002, Amazon faced a huge constraint in their operation, which was the way to operate their warehouses. Yeah. Because all the systems were used to operate warehouses as a warehouse, which means large batches, predefined shipment routes, the way you store the inventory, the way you pick the inventory, the way you load the inventory, you ship the inventory. Everything was assuming you're shipping large batches of the same type of products on predefined distribution routes. Yep. And of course, for Amazon, that was not the case. Their warehouse was actually functioning like a store. Multiple products on multiple orders going to infinite addresses. So the whole system had to change. It became a huge constraint. And they fixed it using the book, The Goal. So
that's a great story, again, about how the goal is across all industries. But we're here today talking about manufacturing.
Yes.
So let's kind of bring theory of constraint into manufacturing and talk a little bit about how manufacturing can really help improve small manufacturers as they are looking to scale up and drive their practices and grow their businesses. Because we talk about this in manufacturing. Mass producing a line is one thing. Producing custom parts in a shop is a little bit different. So can you speak a little bit to how theory of constraint applies into small manufacturing?
So it depends obviously on the type of the manufacturing that we're talking about. But the power of theory of constraints, first of all, is that it doesn't matter what size of company you are. The whole essence is to understand where is your constraint and then to figure out how to structure your operation to get the most from this constraint. Doesn't matter what is your size. Big, small company manufacturers, they may have different constraints, but the idea is to focus there. Now, if you're referring to smaller manufacturers that are more custom-made, but they have, like, let's say, engineering in their department, in their operation, or design, or service. So many times in such environments where work is less repetitive, it's more like a low volumes, high mix, and it's very diverse. In such environments, many times you depend on experts, people who accumulated enough experience in order to do the job right. It's not like a machine you plug to the wall and you get the products again and again.
Yep.
And in such environments, when they really struggle to scale, because when you scale the organization, it means that you're introducing a lot of this non-standard work that falls on the shoulders of these experts. Now, again, it could be your top engineers or welders, or it could be your IT people or service people. It doesn't really matter. But you put a lot of this non-standard work on their shoulders, and they become immediately a bottleneck, a constraint. Mm-hmm. And work piles up in front of them, what we call backlog, open jobs. They are going into bad multitasking. They have to switch back and forth between all the jobs. Everything becomes urgent, which makes the lead times even longer. Now, the challenge is that work cannot wait for the experts to become available. So, Kevin, who do you think needs to do the job eventually if the experts are super busy?
Yeah, well, we got to train the younger folks, right?
Yeah, we got to train, but we cannot train them enough. We don't have the time.
Yep.
So less experienced people will have to do the work, no?
Yep.
And with little guidance.
That's right.
And now, obviously, you'll get a lot of mistakes and rework. And who needs to fix these mistakes?
Well, you're going to pull your most experienced people to go fix
these
them.
guys that are the constraints are the most busiest one need to fix now these mistakes. They're even more busy. Mm-hmm. Now, when we go to such environments, everybody tells us, we need the protocols, we need the SOP, standard operating procedures, we need the manuals. Nobody likes to make mistakes, but who needs to write them? these experts, super busy. Even if they attempt to write them, many times it's premature because work is very diverse.
Yeah.
So even if they attempt to write it, first of all, you put even more load on these experts, and the manuals do not cover many of the cases. Some of them you don't even know you will meet. So again, you still have mistakes. So you have these vicious cycles that the experts are super busy and it just makes them even more busy. And the way out of this vicious cycle is not to pretend that you can standardize the work by making it according to a template tomorrow morning. Because if this was easy to do, it would have been done. And the way out is not just to recruit more experts, because again, if it was easy to do, it would have been done, right?
Yeah.
The way to do it is to understand that since your expert is the bottleneck, we need to reorient the entire flow of work considering this bottleneck. What does it mean? We need to understand what is this expertise that only they should do. Mm-hmm. That if it's done by other people, you will have mistakes. Then we need to evaluate what are they actually doing. How much of what they're actually doing is this expertise, and how much is not this expertise but other things. And what do you think you'll find out? That obviously they are working on many other things, especially if you promoted them to be managers.
Right.
So, and then of course you need to offload from the experts all the non-expert work. And then you reveal some capacity because you offload. And the real thing to get out of the vicious cycle is to use this capacity of the experts that you reveal in order to, we call it full kit, the less experienced people. It's like but not training in a classroom. Preparing them to do the job at hand, okay? And then monitoring as they are working on it. So you need to actually try and have your experts as much as possible full kitting the work for less experienced people than actually doing the work. Mm-hmm. And there is a whole method behind it, but that's something that we many times have to do, especially in the US today when work is coming back. So
yeah. So, we've got two things that are impacting that, right? We have the reshoring initiative right now with a lot of manufacturing that's now coming back to the U.S., and then we have what I call the baby boomers that are about to exit the manufacturing workforce, and that's where this knowledge is, right? To your point, and we've had a gap for years in workforce where we just haven't developed that knowledge, and so as the the younger shops come up now, and even in some of the bigger shops, that is an issue, and how do we fill that gap as quickly as possible and build up that talent?
correct.
So it's a good point. I see it a lot. And in fact, it's talked about in the goal, that we constantly are pulling the more experienced people away to go fix a problem. Well, then that just creates a backlog, and this constant fire drill then of, okay, now we've got to make this order suddenly become the most important order, and it just causes all kinds of issues in there. So it's a great example, and I appreciate that feedback. Let's kind of pivot, because I was at a conference last week where we were talking about AI and how
the magic word.
Yeah, so it's the new catchphrase, and how does AI impact theories of constraint and the analysis, and how can you utilize that, right? So you had mentioned right now an SOP, right? One of the things we had talked about or was talked about at this conference was taking these SOPs and loading them on to machines and having a digitized SOP. I always refer to it as, when the cartridge goes out on a printer and you need to change that cartridge, and these modern machines, they'll basically walk you through every single step that you need to do to fix something on the machine. And that's really an idea with running a CNC when you have a problem or an issue, having a machine that pops up and runs you through that direction. But tell me what you're seeing in AI and how that's being used to impact theory of constraint.
So AI is very effective in environments where you have, a lot of data available. That the AI, it's like the food for the AI, right? And patterns. Mm-hmm. So you can identify patterns. The AI, the machine will identify them, and therefore can produce to you conclusion and results as you want them. So this is like the the starting conditions for AI to be effective, at least in my opinion and what we see. A lot of data and patterns. So anywhere you have this combination, like you mentioned SOP, so as you're getting more and more of this non-standard work, this is data that you're getting. The AI can help you to process what you've already done in order to be able to repeat it better next time. Okay? It's not going to be it's not a self-sustained solution or complete solution, because there is, as we said, in these environments, work is very diverse. So you'll keep getting new work. Okay? The AI maybe can be configured to tell you whether it's a new work or it falls in one of the template patterns that they already discovered. So that's an application. Where we already utilized AI in the theory of constraints world is in the retail environments, retail domain. Because in retail you have a lot of data, all the sales and inventory data of all the SKUs in all the locations, in the various categories of the products, and you can use this data in order to help you, it's called in the retail world, to help you run a real-time execution operation. Because the more you rely on forecasts in order to determine where you should have the products, how to have the right product at the right place at the right time, the more you depend on forecasts, the less successful you will be.
Yeah.
My father used to say, forecast is wrong the moment you write it. So instead of
Texas, that's for sure, for about the weather.
So instead of trying to have a crystal ball to figure out your forecasts and where to put inventories, you can build with AI real-time execution operations that reacts very, very quickly to how reality unfolds. And that's the way we utilize it a lot in theory of constraints.
Interesting. So it makes me then want to ask the question, because I hear about this a lot. Just-in-time inventory, that had become a concept for a long time, and COVID suddenly kind of really shook that all up. And now when you look at your supply chain and that reliance, that can create constraints because it's out of your control. You don't know what's happening. Are you seeing any application there to help, as POs come in to help with the supply chain and how that's dealing with the inventory constraints?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of what I meant when I say real-time execution. So the more you can have the information flowing, information of consumption, of actual demand, not forecast, and coupled with information of short-term forecasting, like if you know you're going to make a promotion or something like that. And the more you have this information flowing, the better manufacturers and suppliers can react to this information and create a real-time execution.
Well, I think that holds true, especially in manufacturing these days with the constant changes and updates that are happening. So I want to take a pivot here and talk a little bit about workforce and bringing workforce into manufacturing and the recruitment that we're doing. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. Number one, we need to have more folks come in to the manufacturing and rebrand manufacturing as to what it is today. It's not the old, dark, dirty manufacturing that many people have a perception of. But there's another concept. We talk about, or I hear at least from a lot of our members, issues that they have with individuals coming into the workforce today and soft skills, this ability to be able to work in teams and understand how to think. And I'm going to come back to the goal real quick, because your father used the Socratic method throughout that book to teach, which you can sense the frustration that Alex has when he's like, I just want the answer. Give me the answer, right? And I think that's what a lot of our younger folks have been conditioned. They've had the answer. So why was it that your father used that Socratic method throughout the book as a teaching method?
My father often told me that his real goal was not to improve companies' performance. That's not why he wrote the book, The Goal, or developed the theory of constraints. In his mind, he said, my goal is that I would like to help people think more clearly. have clarity of thought. Because when you are able to think clearly, which means that you know where to focus and you are able to communicate your intuition. He often used to say, if we cannot clearly verbalize our intuition, we ourselves will do the opposite of what we believe in. Right? So this clarity of thought was for him like the real goal that he would like to advance. And part of it, to develop it, is the Socratic approach. So don't give someone just the answers. Because honestly, when you give him answers, you don't respect him. You assume that, first of all, you assume you know the answer. Why do you assume so? Never say no. So have a dialogue. Put the question in place, not in order to guide him to your answer, but put the real question in place and think together how to answer it. Maybe you have a speculation what should be the answer to this question. Fair enough. Develop it together. Let the other person also share his thoughts on the matter. So that's why he wrote the book the way he did.
Interesting.
Think about growing up to such a father.
Well,
Father, where is the milk? Well, why do you ask this? No, I'm joking.
well, you've learned to think on your own then, for sure. So it's a great example. So let me take that back to the recruiting side. I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about some of these props that I have sitting here. And for those that are listening, what we have is a Lego John Deere skidder that's sitting here. So I have two daughters. They're 5 and 8 years old. And one of the things I'm interested in is introducing them to STEM. I want them to really use their minds to create and build things. And so we do Lego, and we love Lego Technique. And the girls love the gears and how the pieces come together and seeing that. So this skidder is our favorite production right now. Not only does it have gears, but it's got pneumatics, right? So imagine sitting around explaining to 5 and 8 year olds that this air, this invisible, non-tangible thing that we touch is being used to power and move a lot of this equipment. But this was our fourth build. And the way Daddy builds a Lego kit is he takes the packages and he tears them open and he dumps all the pieces on a table. And then talk about constraints, trying to find a piece and go through this. Well, my 8-year-old looks at this and on this build says, okay, Dad, did you understand that the instruction book is color-coded? It's color-coded, so why don't we just start by sorting the pieces into color piles, which will make it more efficient for us to build this. And as she said that, I'm like, oh, wow, did you read the goal? I mean, you just solved one of our constraints in putting together this. And I think it's just one of those real-world examples of how kids can learn constraint and address problems and create efficiency. So I brought that prop to kind of talk about that, besides the fact that it's really cool and it does actually function, and we love playing with it. But we've also got some children's books here that from some of our friends that I wanted to introduce, Meg Preston and Mike Nager. So Mike has written a book called All About Smart Manufacturing. It's a fabulous introduction into advanced manufacturing. Meg has gone a different way. She's created a character called Supply Jane, where I found these books, interesting enough, because I was on Amazon and I was doing a search for Theory of Constraint to try and find some other books around it, and these books popped up. And they actually quote Theory of Constraint, and that this is taking a concept and putting it into a children's book and addressing that. And in this particular book, Supply Chain Clears the Way, Supply Chain is dealing with her uncle's factory, which is a dragon food factory, and they are having a problem keeping up with the demand and the production. And so Supply Chain comes in and starts talking to her uncle about, well, let's go see what's holding up the line. And they start to visit different things, and ultimately she works backwards to find what they call body neck. A worker named Body Neck, right? Bottleneck. We have a bottleneck, and so Body Neck is at a table, and she's trying to put a toy in each of the boxes. But the problem is she's set up right next to a dragon who is testing the food, and the dragon is creating all these flames and melting these pieces that are supposed to go into her box. So supply chain identifies, here's an issue, and this is your problem, right? So what do? They create this new, fireproof glass, and they put the Dragon on the other side of that, and suddenly we're not melting the pieces, right? So here's another concept of constraint, right, that is being identified, and now it's in children's books, and my girls have loved reading these books, and I would encourage that. Read these books, get them, and read them to your kids, and introduce them to STEM, and do that. So I really like that we're pushing these concepts down into the younger generations, and even elementary school. And I don't know, what are your thoughts? Are you going to be put out of business now because we're going to have all these 8-year-olds suddenly learning?
The more the better. On the contrary.
So I think that's a really cool concept, and I thank Meg and Mike for what they're doing to really bring that together. So let me kind of pivot, because as I mentioned earlier, you're doing some work right now with our friends down the road at SAMA, and kind of explain what it is that you're doing down there with the members, and how this came about.
As I mentioned, we are a fairly large consultancy, and as such, most of our work is working with the big guys. Delta Airlines, you mentioned, and Procter & Gamble, etc., and U.S. Air Force. So, but we always felt that we're not doing justice to my father's legacy if we work only with the big guys. Even though business-wise, it makes perfect sense for us. So we thought of finding ways where we can introduce the theory of constraints and help smaller businesses to apply it and get results, quick results, because when you know where to hit with a hammer, where you know where to focus, you get the results fast. So, and then we came up with, a year ago, a new initiative to offer a very practical, concise 2-day training for different companies to send their teams. So it's open for different companies to attend. You attend 1 day, you learn where's your constraints, how to apply the 5 focusing steps, identify your constraints, decide how to get the most out of the constraint, how do you subordinate everything else to enable you to get more of the constraint, elevate the constraints, and what will be the next constraint that you're going to face. So we teach companies how to apply it in their manufacturing, how to apply the same concept to deal with constraints in project environments like engineering, like design, like service. One of them we discussed, the difficulty to scale, to standardize. That's one of the common constraints. There are more like that. So all this happens in the first day. Then we take a break. They go, they apply it, they get some results. We help each one of them during the break one-on-one. And they come back for a second day, which most of it, let's say some of it is devoted to learn how to apply theory of constraints on supply chain to deal with inventories. And most of it is how do you leverage operational excellence. So now that you know how you can produce faster, on time, do better customizations, more customizations, how do you leverage it for growth? How do you create a competitive advantage with these capabilities? So that's the second day of the workshop. And then afterwards, we also do one-on-one coaching. All of it, including the one-on-one, is part of this 2-day package that we're doing. And the way we introduce it in the US is through collaborations with manufacturing associations across the nation. We're already collaborating with 12. SAMA is one of them, and hopefully we introduce it in your region.
Maybe we'll be lucky 13.
Yeah,
so
it will be an honor.
Yeah,
of course.
So I've heard good things about it so far, and for our listeners out there and ARMA members, stay tuned. This will be something we hopefully will introduce later this year and get some movement on that. So excited about that. Let me kind of come back to the books, because your father started with the goal and the theory of constraint, but he didn't end there, right? Over his life, he really started to evolve this process, and I think became really focused on flow and throughput in the ultimate end. And so there's another book on here, Goldratt's Rules of Flow, which
written by my sister.
Written by your sister, that's correct. And So this was kind of where he was, at the end of his life, and he'd wanted to do this. Your sister, I believe, had
She's
worked
the one
with
that
him.
took the brain.
Yeah.
I'm just
got
a nice
the brain.
guy.
All right. Well, so and she also has his writing style. She learned his writing
Amazing.
style, right? Because this book is also written very similar to The
Correct.
Goal, where it's a novel and
Easy
a story.
read, super easy
read. Yeah. So. Talk a little bit about where your dad's evolution was on that.
So this book is basically taking the goal concepts and apply it to a project environment. And in project environment, working with so many companies for so many years, we came to realize that there are several very common constraints, or we call them obstacles to flow, in managing projects. When we say project, it's different from production because work is less standard. Mm-hmm. It's not so repetitive. And work requires a lot more touch time whenever you do the job. It's not like in production, every piece takes you a few minutes and the lead time is weeks. So the touch time is less.
Yeah.
But in project, it's much more. So there are several common obstacles and to flow, which we call constraints. And once it's actually not so difficult to identify which ones are dominant in your operations, in your project operations. When I say project, again, it can be engineering, design, service, accounting. Where work is less standard. And like one of them we already discussed, it's the difficulty to standardize and the dependency on experts. Another one which is very common, we call bad multitasking. Mm-hmm. That's when you are forced to switch from one task to another without completing any of the tasks. And what people greatly underestimate is the damage that bad multitasking has on productivity. Every task will take much longer than twice even. It can take up to 10 times longer when you are engaged in bad multitasking, because you have to stop it in the middle and go do something else until you come back. And then you need to reorient yourself. And many times there are quality issues because of that. And what we found is that bad multitasking is unavoidable when you have a lot of open jobs in front of you. So the moment we call it flood the floor with open work, with work in process, open jobs, you will have bad multitasking. People will have to switch because priorities will switch all the time. Different things becomes urgent, or because you cannot complete the job, something is missing. So you switch. So the way to deal with this obstacle is to put processes in place that will limit the open WIP, will limit the open jobs that people or company or teams are allowed to work on at the concurrently. Mm-hmm. So even if they want, they cannot multitask. Of course, how much you limit, how to manage it, when to release work, all of this is written in the book. There's a whole methodology, but that's another.
It's kind of a contradictory thought, right? Is to be more productive, put less out there so that you're not...
all these obstacles are coming from significant vicious cycles in project environments. You're under pressure to do a lot of tasks. So you open more tasks. This creates bad multitasking. Now the lead times get longer. Since the lead times are longer and new jobs are entering, there is actually even more pressure to do a lot of tasks. Mm-hmm. So and the way to solve it is to say, yes, there is this pressure, but I will actually limit. Then I will not let these jobs go in, and everything will be faster, will be done faster. Yeah. That's the counterintuitive part of it.
Yeah. And you got to trust in that process, I think.
So there are ways to introduce it. Of course, you do proof of concepts, etc. I mean, there is trust and there is results. So first you do it small, you get results, and you understand you need to take it on a bigger scale.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot about bad multitasking. I'm an expert in it. So
me too.
How do you think theory of constraint can impact personal lives in this crazy world where we're all running around trying to do different things? Are my kids a constraint? Is that a problem? How do I deal with kids?
You're referring to personal development or this kind of...
Well, I think just, let me put it to this way. ARMA is a small organization. I wear a lot of different hats, and I feel like it's was I productive this week? Did I have the right strategic goals for the week? Where's my constraint? Because I always tend to think my constraint is...
I'll tell you what my father told me once. He said, Rami, notice the title of the book is The Goal, not the constraint. And there is a reason. Because your constraint is defined by your goal first. right? So the first thing is to understand what is your goal. What do you want to accomplish? Because if you don't know what you want to accomplish, what is your goal, then how can you understand whether you're making progress or not? Once you define your goal, then you should ask, what is constraining me from achieving more of my goal? Now here, when we talk about personal development, it's quite tricky. Because many times we use the analogy of the weakest link, right? What is your weakest link? Focus there. But in personal development, you need to understand, once you understand your goal, you should not ask now what is your weakest link. You should ask what is your strength. What is the strength that you have that because of it you define your goal the way you defined it, that you want to leverage it. And then you think what is constraining, what's my weak link to leverage my strength. You understand? It's like, it's in this context. I see many people that are trying just to improve things that they are not good at because they think it's their weak link. But if you're not good at it, many times it's just not natural for you.
Yeah. You know,
I mean,
it's a great concept because, I think I saw this trend, through my career where, every time you did your annual evaluation, what they focused on, here's your strengths and your weaknesses, but so much attention was focused on your weaknesses and saying, put your energy into improving that. And then it takes away from the things that you do well. And
weakness
I think
should be defined in the context of your strength.
Yeah.
What is first your strength and what you want to achieve? And then you define the weakness, the constraint, as what prevents you from leveraging your strength better.
Well, there you have it, folks. That's a little self-improvement.
There we go.
Set a goal, which we'll close out since, we started with the goal and we'll end with the goal. So, Rami, thank you again for coming back. Round 2, dealing with the Texas weather and everything else. It was a pleasure to finally get you here and do that. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed this and found some useful content with the topic that we discussed today. Stay tuned. If weather permitting, we will be back with our next podcast here shortly, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you from all of us at ARMA for tuning in for Manufacturing Austin.